Now we're moving straight to Brazil, and Fabio Soares is going to talk us through his presentation. Thank you, Fabio.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me try to find first my presentation. So we've been asked to discuss in a short paper what have been the 3 features that had led to equitable growth in our countries. So we have seen that some of the countries have replied, well, we are not having equitable growth. But for the case of Brazil, I'm going to argue that yes, for the past 10 years, we have been having equitable growth. And my question here, what I want to discuss with you is to share some of the concerns in order to answer if this growth is sustainable or not, and what are the challenges for the future to keep it equitable. So to answer the question quite directly, I say that there are 3 key factors. The first one was the macroeconomic stability reached in the late 90s. The second one is a process that starts much earlier, and it was basically the expansion of the social protection programs and policies and of the social service, but in this talk I'm going to concentrate on the social protection programs. And the third one are the institutional reforms that came together with the macroeconomic stability and with the expansion of the social protection. I'm not going deep into these institutional reforms. I'm just saying that they are important because they give sustainability to both to the macroeconomic stability and also to institutionalize the social protection programs so that they become part of the normal public policy and not something that you just add on when it's necessary. So in terms of this economic stability, it's important to notice that during the 80s and 90s, Brazil simply did not grow. The growth was quite low and combined with high inflation. We had episodes of hyperinflations in several years. The stabilization only came in 1994 with the Real Plan. Real is the name of our currency now. And it came together with a monetary reform that had a monetary and an exchange rate anchor to keep inflation under control. That did not solve most of our macroeconomic problems. It just kept the inflation under control because basically interest rates, as was discussed this morning, are quite high in Brazil. It's the highest real exchange rates in the world, and it still is. And the overvalued exchange rate did not help manufacturing industries and the creation of jobs. But coupled with this monetary reform, there were several institutional reforms that took place in the late 90s and beginning of the 2000s. I would like to highlight the adoption of inflation targeting, the adoption of fiscal surplus targets, the law of fiscal responsibility, especially for the states. And also it was important to see that between the Cardoso administration that started in 1995 and the Lula administration from 2003 until 2010, we didn't have any structural change in these pillars. So the macroeconomic pillars remain the same. The only thing that could be quoted as a change was the response to the crisis with the fiscal stimulus package. That some critics said that could put under risk the whole macroeconomic stability. This was not observed. And now the Brazil is going through a process of fiscal consolidation matched with an attempt to lower the interest rate, something that started actually last week. So as for social protection, Brazil, as most of the Latin American countries, had a dual system. So basically we had social security, social insurance for the formal sector workers, and almost nothing for the informal sector workers. During the authoritarian regime, we started doing something for the rural informal workers with some sort of non-contributory social pension. But it was only under the Constitution in 1988 that most of the reforms on the social sector came out. So the universal rural pension became a right. We also enact a disability grant and a benefit for the elderly, and basically here the urban elderly that do not have access to the rural pension. We also have universalized the health system along the lines of the NHS in the UK. We also managed to universalize primary education in the late 90s. And finally, we developed the conditional cash transfers that started at the municipal level and became a federal policy from 2003 onwards. That has had a cost, especially on the social protection programs. So if you see at the figures of the federal government expenditures, social assistance increased from 0.08% to 0.7%. From 1995 to 2009. In terms of GDP, actually social assistance now in Brazil, basically Bolsa Família and the non-contributive benefits for the old age and for the disabled is around 1% of the GDP. So Social Security also increased a lot, and here it's included the rural pensions. But that came with a fiscal cost. So the tax burden in Brazil increased from 26% of the GDP in 1998 to 35% in 2008. But here I have to say that interest payments also increased a lot, and they make up nowadays 6% of the GDP. So just to highlight how the macroeconomic policy is also a problem in the fiscal area. In terms of growth rates, Brazil actually is at the bottom of the league table of the BRICS. We only grew 4.4% between 2004 and 2010, but that's quite an achievement if we compare to the past decades. From 1981 to 2002, Brazil had grown only by 2%. And it's quite different, but it's still well below what we have witnessed during the miracle of the import substitution industrialization, in which Brazil grew by 7.5% between 1947 and 1980. But something that was quite dramatic in Brazil in the past 8 to 10 years has been the growth of the income of the poorest households. So if we decompose the growth by deciles, we are going to see that actually the poorest in Brazil, especially the 20% poorest, have experienced growth rates similar to the ones in India, just below the ones in China. That has brought inequality down and poverty down. That was not only caused by the social protection program, that was not only the Bolsa Família and the rural pensions, but it was actually the labor market responding to the growth process, coupled with an income policy. So the minimum wage in Brazil in the same period has increased in real terms by 75%. So it's interesting to see that the formalization of employment in Brazil has grown at the same time that the average income of the formal sector workers and all workers have also increased. And an argument that I'm making here is that this whole process of this increase in the internal demand helped Brazil to weather the crisis in a much smooth way than other countries, basically shifting the external demand, basically from China for our commodities, towards the internal demand. So what are the challenges in this process? Basically, I see 5 constraints: the highest interest rates in the world, the overvalued exchange rate and its implications for manufacturing and employment, lack of private funds to finance long-term investments that also increase the fiscal burden of the government because we have different exchange rates for interest exchange rates for the long-term investments, and the Treasury has to pay this difference in interest rates, and the lack of domestic savings, because we are basically in Brazil, we are a credit-based mass consumption economy now. So in terms of new policies, what we have to be creative about is to try to reduce the interest rates, to ease private investments, to try to reduce the leakage to the international economies of this extra money that would be available, to try to perform an industrial policy in terms of innovation to avoid the specialization in the commodity sector. And finally, what's going to be a quite challenging if we want to have equitable growth is to emphasize less sensitive redistributive policies, for example, trying to have a fiscal reform and to have more progressive taxation and reform the pensions of the public servants, something that it seems is going to be tried this year, and to improve the quality of the social expenditure, because the income policy seems to be having achieved a limit now. Thank you.